Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 8, Episode 50 of our weekly Q&A videos. Coming up on that, I would say 1 year mark, but we've missed weeks here and there, so it's actually probably been more than a year of this season.
That's right.
At this point. But if you're on YouTube, links in the description to get it on the podcast. If you're on the podcast, who knows if we have a YouTube channel? You'll never be able to find it. And getting into our first question of the week. Oh, you had your hand up. Was there something?
I feel like I'm at school. No. I was just thinking about, we're talking about what's been going on because you know how when we were doing this for a while, we used to ground it a little bit more in what was happening in our lives or in the world.
Yeah.
And we've gotten away from doing that partly because it doesn't feel like there's the same kind of urgency. Like the world is like a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of that is due to Joe Biden getting elected and stuff changing. But I feel like when I'm reading stuff on Twitter and in the news, there's still, embers burning in that dumpster.
Well, I mean, it's like, Joe Biden's seemingly not a great guy. I think he's
flawed.
Yeah.
I think he's definitely not the most progressive out of all the Democrats.
Well, and also with all the really credible, was it sexual assault or rape accusations that he had?
Doesn't he just sniff people's hair?
Not just that, there was credible sexual assault accusations
was there?
And stuff too. Oh yeah, absolutely.
That
you'll have to look into that. Yeah, no, I mean,
but political wasn't the direction I was going into.
Yeah.
What I was thinking about was that the World Fantasy Convention is coming up, and I know we've made a lot of decisions around the pandemic. Like one of them being that when somebody supported us on Patreon, for example, that they would stay in our credits until the pandemic was over, even if they stopped supporting us.
Yeah, which we thought was going to be like a year.
Right.
And it's turned into
a year and a half, more than a year and a half later, we're still waiting.
Indefinite. We're keeping people's name in there because I think people supporting us in that way, in that kind, more than the actual amount of money that they donate, is what we actually have always cared about.
So that's just an example, but what's really brought it to mind lately is back, I guess, a few months ago, World Fantasy Convention.
Yeah.
And it's no secret. We went to the one in 2012, I believe. That was they called it Toronto. It's not really Toronto. It's only you can only call it Toronto if you don't live in Toronto because it's way out in the suburbs.
Yeah.
Really close to us. And it's coming back to Canada again in Montreal this year. Yeah. I was so excited about going. And then I thought, well, it's not looking good enough. All the cases and stuff. And then it looked like maybe a few months back that it was good. And then the World Fantasy Convention made an announcement saying that basically most of their guests of honor were going to be virtual, meaning they weren't actually going to be there. And I thought, well, is it worth the risk of going? And, there's all that kind of... It's not going to be nearly as open and as fun as I hoped.
That's a calculation. So, like, when we took that little break, right? I went on like a little road trip to the East Coast, right? And the only reason I went out there was because there was so little COVID that I could act like normal as a double vaccinated person who was, especially since I was not seeing like family or anything, and the only people I was interacting with were other people who were in public spaces, who sort of signed up for being in the space. There was nobody that I was endangering, by being out and about and living like normal. Yeah. But a place like Montreal, I mean, for the road trip I had to go back through Montreal, and there was a lot of people, and the cases numbers weren't as good while we were there, and people weren't that careful. And on the way out, there was no vaccine passport for like eating in restaurants.
But there is now.
Yeah. So, it was a more stressful environment to be in. And when you're going out for like a con or something, you're staying at a hotel and being in a lot of public places with a lot of people. When you're in a hotel, really everywhere is kind of a public space. Outside of your room, everywhere is a place where probably somebody has been without their mask recently. Yeah.
So the thing is, though, John Picasso, who is the artist guest of honor, has announced that he's actually changed. I don't know if he's changed his mind, but he's come out saying that he knows that there was the announcement saying he was only going to be virtual, but he's actually coming from Texas to be in Montreal, which is kind of cool. But World Fantasy Convention is only a month away, and it is so tempting. And I'm really thinking that getting this close, my decision would be, leaning a little bit towards going. And it's just so tough because you're right. How long it's been is way longer than we ever expected when the NBA first announced that they were gonna, shut down the rest of their season.
Yeah, it's been weird. I mean, that's one of the interesting things is we talk about how stuff doesn't feel like as much of a dumpster fire. And I think a lot of it is just us getting more used to it. Because the thing I was going to say with Joe Biden is that, the one thing that President Trump did was make everybody pay attention and pay a lot of attention to politics.
Right.
Where there's a lot of things that he did that people were like, oh, this is terrible, Trump's really terrible. And then it turned out that, like either every Republican like president before him for like the last 50 years did the same thing, or everybody including like Democrats, right? There was some stuff that people were like, this is awful, this is terrible, and they're like, okay, but like Obama did it, and you could check and it was like, oh yeah, no, Obama did do that, right? And so there's a lot of things that people were pointing to, and some of it was specifically bad that Trump did, and not to say they're all the same, right? That's not the argument I'm trying to make at all. But there's a lot of ways in which Joe Biden isn't great, right? And a lot of stuff that he's doing where he's, like either like continuing something that Trump did, or in some cases even when he's like, pulling back and just like saying like repealing stuff that Trump did, doing it in a way that's maybe not careful or considered, or sort of thinking about what the end goal is, or just undoing something that Trump did, those decisions can cause harm too, right? And so there's a lot of ways in which, if you look at like U.S. presidents, there's a lot of stuff that's really worth being in depth and critical and really examining them. And the part of the problem with other politicians is it's what we're talking about here, where it's not that it's not bad, it's that we're used to it, and we don't pay as much attention to it, and we let it fade to the background a little more, and then the bad stuff happens, but instead of everybody being on it right away, people aren't the same way. It's not in the focus as much.
And it really sort of, there's one sort of incident that really brought it home for me, that it's not even necessarily so much that Trump is a bad guy. I mean, he is. But that what he's really done is unleashed a lot of people. He's sort of basically taken away their inhibitions for doing bad things, and they're willing to be openly bad. So when at his own rally where he told people to get vaccinated, and people started booing him. And I realized, it's really not about Trump. He's old. No. I don't know if he's going to run again. Maybe he will, but he's not going to be around forever. But the people that he's unleashed will be around for a long time.
It's about shifting the conversation. And it's that, like the Overton window was something that I feel like got discussed a lot. When Trump got first elected and stuff. It's like, what's acceptable conversation? What's acceptable to believe in? There's a huge amount of just really kind of shocking conversations, which almost feel like they shouldn't be discussions at all, especially with like all the anti-vax people and stuff, right? There's like a lot of like conversations, and part of the problem too is that the conversations are so ridiculous that there are these people who almost feel fake. They're so, extreme, right? That it kind of poisons the people who have real things to say and maybe valid opinions, right? The conversation around vaccines is so poisoned that it's really, there's a lot of people who are going like, if you don't get the vaccine, you're terrible and you're ridiculous and you're, stupid.
And some people are. Some people are, but I think there are some people who are not quite there, and they're just, they're victims of a lot of the uncertainty. They're sort of caught in the middle a little bit.
I think being wary of a vaccine, the vaccine is okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I don't think you can help how you feel. And I think if you're scared by something, if you're nervous, if you're not willing to take it, I think that's totally a fair personal choice to make, as long as you are taking all the appropriate steps not to endanger other people. So if you are scared of the vaccine, but you're staying inside your house, only going out for like grocery shopping and stuff, doing the social distancing, doing all this sort of stuff that that comes with being a responsible person. I think getting the vaccine is one of the things that you can do to be sort of conscientious and responsible, and do your part to make this stuff better. To be a decent
human being.
Yeah. Yeah. But I also think that, getting the vaccine and then going to a bunch of like raves and huge parties and seeing 1 million people and, all that stuff is not any better or any more safe than somebody who's not getting the vaccine, but who's still being really careful.
See, I think the issue, for me at least, is that the people who are the most vocal about not taking the vaccine, who are willing to jump into arguments online,
tend to be dicks.
They tend to be, they're not so much uncertain, is that they're committed to disseminating disinformation and making people more scared, and that's what makes me angry. Because I think with the right information, the decision is really easy. Like there shouldn't be any uncertainty when you have the right information.
So I don't begrudge anybody for being cautious or wanting to exercise their own bodily autonomy or anything else. Even if there was it. The vaccines are safe, right?
Oh yeah.
But that almost defeats the purpose, because I think even past that, even if there was no ambiguity, if the vaccine never did a single bad thing to anybody ever, which it might not have, and even if we had tested it, we'd had it like in people and had tested it for like decades or hundreds of years and knew that there was absolutely no possibility for like long-term effects, I'd still be okay with an individual person exercising their own right not to get it, as long as you're not causing anyone else harm. It's not even about like, I think it's okay because you might not be wrong. It's not about being right or being wrong. It's about giving people the ability to exercise their own personal choice. But it's also about what I care about is you not causing harm to other people.
Yeah, and I guess the extension of that discussion goes into vaccine mandates, and I feel very strongly that the vaccine mandates are correct.
Oh yeah,
especially for people who are potential vectors to vulnerable people.
Yeah. Because if you want to eat in a restaurant, if you want to participate in stuff, right? They're not saying that we're going to come to your house and shoot you, right? If you're not getting the vaccine. But if you are not willing to take this step to be safe, there's certain activities that you can't engage in without endangering people. And it's not fair for you to not be willing to sort of put your own, to put some skin in the game to make, the environment safe for other people, but then still get to participate in all these spaces, right? Like you have to be willing to make sure that people are safe.
I think I guess if I wanted to try to pinpoint one of the difficulties that I have is that, so you're right. It is a totally legitimate concern to say, well, we haven't had it for a long time, despite the fact that mRNA vaccines have been studied for probably about 17 years when they started trying to make a vaccine against the first SARS virus. Yeah. So it's been studied for a long time, but you can't ignore the fact that stage 3 studies are going to be at most tens of thousands of people, and the largest study is really what happens on a population level, and it's called post-marketing information. Yeah. And it's true, we haven't had that kind of large population study where really rare complications are going to show up, and we won't until we've had everybody using it for a while. Now, the problem, though, is that the people who are pushing that narrative as the biggest thing is they're also pushing the idea that there's no urgency to it. So, if you've got a real emergency and you've got these decisions to make, sometimes you make a decision that carries a little bit of uncertainty because right now there's a certain benefit to it because you're avoiding a certain danger.
Yeah, that's almost certainly better, but potentially not perfect.
So I guess the issue is that when I'm seeing in media, when people are pushing the anti-vaccination narrative, alongside that, they're also pushing the idea that there's no urgency, that something needs to be done now before you've got the information. Because if you were to wait until you had perfect information, which you'll never will, but when you have more information, which will never end, creating a false sense of security where oh, we've got the time to wait. We'll just wait and see what happens before you decide. That's the part that I think makes it more dangerous. That's not obvious on a really superficial level when you look at it, because if you don't recognize that part of the reason why it's so frustrating to listen to people saying that we don't know what the long-term effects are.
It's because we don't know what the long-term effects of COVID are.
Well, I think we do, actually. We know more about the long-term effects of COVID than we do about the vaccine.
We know the short and medium-term effects are bad for COVID and pretty much non-existent for the vaccine.
So I feel like that a lot of people...
I say pretty much. I think they are non-existent. But
not in a way that... Not in the kind of numbers that's even orders of magnitude within the kind of numbers that you're seeing with the actual wild infection.
Yeah.
So I think that's why a lot of the arguments for anti-vaccination, again, if you're uncertain, that's one thing. But if you're trying to make the argument and you elide the discussion about, well, there actually is a bit of urgency, you try to pretend that, the one of the world's best healthcare systems was overrun. A whole country was overrun because they had too many cases in their ICUs.
Yeah.
I think it's a bad faith argument, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's very true. Yeah. So, anyways,
so now we're grounding
get vaccinated people.
Yeah, please do. The faster you get vaccinated, the faster we'll get back to a semblance of normalcy.
Yeah. I mean, we're both vaccinated, and we'd do it again.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's our nieces. I think part of the reason I'm thinking about that is I was there was a concert that I had bought tickets for a couple months ago. That was right around the time I got vaccinated. Mm-hmm. Was the BB No Money Eat Your Veggies tour concert in Toronto, and it was supposed to be this weekend. And coming up to it, I realized that even though I'm double vaccinated, just with the numbers where they were, I wasn't entirely comfortable being in this big sort of concert space with so many people.
Right.
Just because people with the vaccine still get it. And can still give it to people, right? And it's so more because me, I know personally that if I get it, I'm going to be fine.
Yeah.
I mean, even unvaccinated, it's vanishingly small chance that I would die.
Right.
But with vaccination, it's very unlikely that there'll be significantly long-term effects, or even that I'll get all that sick, right, in the short term. But I still think overall, if we can keep ourselves out of situations in which we're keeping COVID, hanging around.
Yeah.
It's best to do that wherever possible. But it got delayed, and so
I want to get to Evan Pratt's question, which is our first one, but I want to say one last thing about vaccines and the arguments and why it feels like such bad faith. One of the biggest arguments I've seen online repeated over and over, it's like a stupid talking point, is that, well, we know that vaccine won't completely prevent transmission, so how do you justify a vaccine passport if you're still going to be potentially spreading it?
Yeah.
It's the reason why it's a dumbest argument, because it's dealing with a binary absolute. It's basically saying, well, if you can't prevent all infections, and then you throw your hands up in the air.
If you can't prevent all pregnancies, why do you use condoms or any birth control method?
Right, because just because it's not 100% doesn't mean that it doesn't reduce the risk, and that if we get everybody vaccinated, somebody who's got less risk, that's the risk that we're willing to tolerate, and somebody who's got unmitigated risk, where it's just wide open, and there no... The analogy that I haven't seen, but in my mind makes a lot of sense, is we do what we can to prevent people from driving drunk.
Yeah.
And people who are driving drunk, maybe they don't always get into car accidents, and maybe people who are sober get into car accidents too.
Yeah.
But a lot less.
Yeah.
Their risk is a lot less, so we don't do things to try to prevent sober people from driving the same way, and we have restrictions on people who are drunk and driving.
Yeah.
I think that the problem with analogies, they're never perfect, but I think it lets people get a real sense of the proportion in a way that just telling them, hey, reducing the risk makes enough of a difference that making sure that we recognize those people and letting them do more activities that are a little less dangerous than if we just let everybody who's unvaccinated do all the same things too, is a worthwhile endeavor.
Damage control is always something that you engage in. Very few things in life are perfect 100%.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need to do enough.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest, I'm not saying that I think the government is doing a great job. Vaccine passports and that stuff, I think, is one step in the right direction. Yeah. Right? In addition to everything else, I think a lot of the ways that government has handled stuff around COVID, like most governments, has been pretty bad, actually. Most is maybe unfair. But in Ontario, they've done a pretty bad job with the restrictions and everything.
I agree. I mean, listen, could they have done a better job? Yes. Did I recognize at the time when they were doing it that there were bad things? Yes. But I also understand at least some of the reasoning behind it. It's rational. It's a once in a lifetime, hopefully never again kind of thing. But, no, it is hard. I mean, with Ontario especially. I mean, the thing that I think I've had the most issue with how they've done stuff is that they've done that really half-assed version of things. Sure.
Where they've made stuff there still has been a lot of restrictions and life still has been really hard. And they've seemed to, as soon as we got a little more handle on stuff, they were always like easing up their restrictions just at early enough that things just got bad almost right away again. And they weren't, the plan wasn't set up to keep stuff down when it was there. It was like we were just playing like hide and seek where we'd, or like playing peekaboo with COVID, right? Where we'd cover our eyes and, the tent would build and it was like, oh, it's getting good and good. And then they just like let it back in. And it's like, okay, well, we're back exactly where we started.
I think the biggest frustration for me there is that restrictions are bad. 100% agree. If they just made them a little bit worse, like sucked it up, been willing to have people call them, to be really angry with them about making the restrictions, if they just been a little bit better, like a little bit harsher, it would have been so much better. Like it was harsh enough to be annoying, but not harsh enough to be so much more effective.
Yeah, because in general, I mean, we've lived our lives more strictly than the restrictions have necessitated us. Right. For most, if not all, the pandemic, we've done more personally than the restrictions make illegal. Right. And I mean, really, they could have done they could have gone a little bit worse. They went right in the middle road where I don't think anybody's happy. Right. I think the people who didn't want restrictions at all are miserable and constantly pushing back against it. And the people who do want restrictions they're miserable for the same reason the people who don't want restrictions are miserable, because they want to go outside and want to do stuff, right? It's not like they're happy staying home, but they just recognize the importance of it, and but they're miserable because it's not going far enough, and it's not actually to the point where it's getting things done. And then the way that we've leaned on the vaccines, there's been a lot of disappointments because of COVID and how stuff, and both how the government's handled things, but also how a lot of individuals have handled things with not willing to be vaccinated and just making this the hill to die on for personal freedoms as opposed to collective safety. It was the same thing that I really it was the same starting point that made it almost impossible for me to ever get to a point where I would like respect Jordan Peterson as like an academic. Because the first hill that he was going to die on was that his personal freedoms were more important than humanizing and respecting trans people. Right. And when that's the thing that launches you into fame and celebrity
and prominence,
unless you come out and say, that was an absolutely terrible thing that I shouldn't have done, there's no real road after that where I go, okay,
there's no redemption.
Now I'll listen to the next thing that you're gonna say, right?
With an open mind.
With an open mind, yeah, exactly.
Got it.
One other thing that we should note is that the hill that he died on with the bill for the trans thing, totally unrelated, but no one was ever arrested. All the stuff that he was talking about was just scaremongering nothing that he used as an excuse to ideologically misgender people.
Right.
Unrelated.
I think, you know what, though? A lot of times we have our gut reactions. We have our intuitive reactions that happen quickly, emotionally, based on all our life experience. The same way, I'm going to bring it back to injustice. There's lots of reactions that we have in terms of, say, how we play certain things.
Yeah.
Like certain situations. And it's really easy, actually, and I think a lot of people will do this, is justify it after the fact to try to bring rational thought into it, to say, this is why I do this. But I think a lot of it is after the fact.
Yeah.
Justification. And so it's not unusual that people will do that kind of stuff because their feeling is, oh, this is what's right. And I guess it really breaks down when people aren't open to the possibility that they might be wrong. And that's why I think sometimes when people who feel like admitting that they're wrong is a weakness are some of the most awful people.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, Jordan B. Peterson, let's talk about that. He's a psychologist. There's a lot of psychological research that we're bad at understanding why we feel the way we do about things and how precious we are about ideas that we've already had and things that we already have. And the way that, even when we try to think systematically about something,
right.
Just random noise in the environment can totally throw us off.
Right.
And make us do and act in ways that are, that we just post hoc justify however we want after the fact.
That's
really
what I was post hoc.
Yeah.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyways, we'll actually answer like a question or two before we just talk about COVID-19 and people we don't like for the entire episode.
Yeah, that went a lot longer than I thought it would.
Yeah.
Apologies. I wish there was a way we could say. I mean, we can put it in the description, but that we could go back and say at the beginning. If you don't
disclaimer,
jump to 26 and a half minutes if you want to miss all the talk about.
We could do that.
Questions. Yeah,
we could do that. Okay. Anyways, our first question of the week comes from Evan Pratt. And they say, out of curiosity, you've mentioned a lot before in past videos about your thoughts on characters, underrated and otherwise, but what is your favorite special? I was going to limit the question to super, but I'm not sure if your style of play, being more quick and efficient oriented, if you would prefer something less cinematic but more efficient to, say, wipe out an entire team, or often do you enjoy the satisfying cinematic of a character going over the top? Can't thank you enough for all you do. I'm sad I didn't find you sooner.
Oh, that's nice. I like that.
Yeah, so that was great, and we cut off the first part, which was just a response to us from many weeks ago at this point, because we're late getting to this. So apologies, Evan.
Right.
But I don't know. So for the animations, I like the funny ones, I think. And sometimes those are funny because they're inherently funny, and sometimes they're funny for non-obvious reasons. So I like Harley Quinn Super because it's a little funny and light, and, with the pie and everything and the explosion.
Yeah.
But the two other ones that I think are really great, that are really coming to me, that have stuck with me, I really like Superman Super because I think it's a funny one accidentally because he knocks somebody all the way up into space.
Yeah.
And then instead of just letting them fly away forever, he decides to fly up to knock them back down so he can keep beating them up. Which when you look at it, if you were Superman and you're trying to win a fight and you've already knocked somebody hurtling away into space forever, it seems like you can sort of call it a day there. It seems like maybe you just about got him.
Well, it's not like he's one of those, like you see a lot of those TV shows that are not necessarily realistic, and you think, in the context of the show, hey, they shouldn't just leave them lying there.
Yeah.
They need to finish them off.
Yeah.
And they don't.
Yeah.
So, in the context of some stories like that, you say, okay, that makes sense. Let them get away with that and finish them off. But Superman's not like that. He would be the kind of person who would not want to beat somebody to death.
Yeah.
He would want to just subdue them, and it feels like it is funny.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. And the other one that I really like is Batman's third special, but not every Batman's third special.
Oh, Arkham Origins
Batman, because he has this really gross, crusty facial hair because it's clearly designed so that it looks good from a distance, or looks like stubble from a distance, but when it's close up, it just reads like really nasty, I don't know, just gross, scraggly crust.
So speaking
those
about
are the ones I like.
What I hate what the game did was when they made supers less important.
Yeah,
and they still happen. Mm-hmm. But I mean, way back when, you couldn't block supers. Literally were unblockable.
Yeah,
and so you couldn't reduce the damage from them.
Yeah,
and before they amped up the crit damage.
Yeah.
So that special 2s would do more damage than a super.
Yeah.
Supers meant something.
Yeah.
And they still mean something to me, to the point... And that's why I think I get such a kick out of when the few times that I see a simultaneous super...
Oh, yeah, and both animations are playing over top of each other.
So, despite wanting to do stuff fast, every once in a while when the situation presents itself and I can remember, and I tag in or they tag in 3 bars... I try to time it and do a super, even though it's not efficient, it's a waste of time, just to see those, like, the best simultaneous, like, I've got a bunch now. And I think at some point it's probably worth doing a video where, like, you know what would be cool?
Simultaneous supers?
Yeah, side by side, so you can compare what a super looks like normally, and then do it where you've got extra things happening in it.
Would you have to do would you have to do 2 separate side by sides, one for each of the OG supers going into it, or would you try to arrange it so that the 3 videos were all on screen at the same time?
Yeah, that would be very difficult. It might be worth doing, like, replaying the double super both times. Yeah. And then I guess the hard part would be trying to get the opponent to do a super.
Yeah.
But maybe what you do is just do a mirror of it. Because I think there's software that lets you do that, right?
That just flips it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can just flip it very easily.
On the horizontal axis. Yeah. Okay. So that would be kind of cool.
I think almost anything lets you do that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's video.
I thought you were talking about doing something much more complex. You're just asking for software that lets you...
Yeah, to flip it, to make it look like it's the opponent doing the super.
Yeah.
Because then you could do it, right?
I mean, yeah, definitely. Zoom lets you mirror video.
So this is what I think, why I like super so much, is, and why I like simultaneous super so much, is because the supers are really cinematic.
Yeah.
I mean, from a practical point of view, they're useless, because they do less damage than a special 2. They waste more power than a special 2.
Yeah.
And they take way more time to finish than a special 2.
Yeah.
But out of all the other specials, I think, from a practical point of view, I really like a super that is relatively evenly distributed. Because if it's too front-end loaded, then, or not enough hits, then you don't do enough to the second person. If it's too back-end loaded, then you almost never knock somebody out before you can spread a little bit of the love to the next opponent.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what else.
See, I'm just thinking of other supers I like. Another super that I like because I think is funny is Green Lantern's one. Because he can make anything that he wants.
Right.
And he just makes a bunch of random crud to throw
I know,
people
2 buses.
Another.
Or subway cars
it's like
or something.
A big hammer, subway cars. Isn't there planes?
Yes, there are.
It's just like, what...
I never understood Green Lantern that way, right? Like, he can imagine anything. And so in the comic book, he would make, like, big hands or something.
Yeah.
And I think... I don't know. Yeah, I know what you mean.
He's somebody... He's got a lot of power, but creativity is not one of them.
Yeah, I think...
one of his powers.
I have to look through our library. Maybe somebody else will want to do this, too. But I'm pretty sure we did a video at one point of all the different supers. Maybe. I feel like we did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard because I'm trying to... I think the ones where people do a bunch of random junk, like a huge amount... You know, Green Lantern's summoning stuff constantly, and the whole thing that he's doing with it is just hucking stuff at people, basically. Yeah. It's just the equivalent of hucking large objects at somebody, which feels really funny. What's her name? Raven.
Yeah.
Bring somebody to a whole other dimension.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Just to have a big dude
That's her
laser
dad.
Eyes out. That's her
dad.
Okay. I think that one's funny. That's another one where it's like if you're dimensional portaling people and all you're trying to do is win a fight, it really seems like if you just drop somebody in the middle of nowhere in some
or in the middle of a mountain.
Yeah.
You make them so that, you know, that their atoms are coexisting with something else that would destroy them, I think.
A million different things, you know. That's the thing is that, you know, I see all these people and the supers, because the supers are where they really sort of let you get wild with it. There's a lot of people who have a huge amount of power behind them and are doing stuff. And then I'm going, it sort of seems like you just won the fight there and then brought them back down so that you could just keep beating them up. Right?
Yeah.
And I always find those a little funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have any specific specials or supers you want to shout out?
Maybe it's influenced by the fact that I've been playing with this character so much, but I love New 52 Wonder Woman's Special 2. It's got nice balance, huge amount of damage, enough hits, and enough spacing between the hits that when you knock somebody out, you can do a significant amount of damage to the next person tagging in. The ones I really don't like are the supers that, the specials that have the secondary effects, which reduces your damage, and the secondary effect isn't good enough to justify it.
Yeah.
But I will say I really like Arkham Knight Catwoman's Special 2, because it does a decent amount of damage, it's got the extra bleed, and with her passive, it makes it even better.
That's fair.
Okay. Off the top of my head.
Yeah, so those, you gave the practical answers and I gave the ones that I like looking at.
Yeah, you know what? If I can dig up, I think we did the bronze and maybe all the silver character supers. Mm-hmm. And if I can dig that up, maybe I'll put a link in the description.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there we go. That's our...
We got time for one more question, I think, right?
One more quick? Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Our next one comes from CN. They say, hey guys, how can I take advantage of New 52 Superman? I don't have Tantu Totem, but I have New 52 Wonder Woman. I've used some power gen gears like Shazam Cloak and Fourth World Helmet, but to be honest, it's not enough.
And that's absolutely right. I think CN has already answered their own question in that. Really, the sad news, I guess, or the sad answer is you can't take advantage of New 52 Superman. So the passives that rely on specials and power generation, in this case, right? It's not so much a special as generating enough power. Most fights, it's not going to make a difference unless you have Tantu Totem. Because not only do you need quick power generation, which you're getting with the power generation gears, but you have to get the power back again quickly. Because those passives are essentially useless. New 52 Wonder Woman only gives her teammates half of what she spends. So, New 52 Superman, you're waiting for him to get secondary power. That's even slower. Mm-hmm. And it isn't just the 1 bar of power that Tantu Totem gives you when you tag in. It's those 2 abilities where you get power back immediately and pass, and then, with her passive, pass it on to her teammates. That changes the complexion of the game, where you get it if you knock them out, and you get it if it doesn't do any damage. I love seeing the Astral Harness because it's an easy way to give it at least a couple bars of power on an invulnerability to your teammates, while doing no damage. So here's the thing: if you look at it, what's the abilities? Right? It's you restore 100% of power if the enemy gets KO'd, and you restore 100% of power if the enemy takes no damage. Even if you generate a bunch of power, generate 2 bars. Rouse a Ghoul Scimitar, back roll. You take it and do a special 2, what happens? Now you're just going to have to slog through a fight trying to generate more power.
Yeah.
Before Tantu Totem, those passives that relied on specials and power generation, totally useless. They made no difference in the game, and what you'd have to rely on is basically a character that had not much of a special. There would be so few fights where it would make a difference that it wasn't even worth trying to build a team around it.
Yeah. So there we go. I think that wraps that answer up, just about.
I think so. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there, it's like one of those other questions, who's richer?
Yeah.
And you say who's got more money, Spider-Man or Superman? And the answer is Batman.
Why you told that joke like 2 episodes in a row now?
I think so. Yeah, because the problem, I guess, is that when you ask that kind of question, you know how there's the expression "there's no such thing as a bad question," but and they're not. It's not a bad question because the underlying idea, the underlying principle is what can you do with New 52 Superman is a good one, but if you frame it in a way
as like what replaces this.
Or how do you make use of it? The answer is... The question is very leading. And I think the right answer is not where you're leading it to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there we go. That'll bring us to the end of this video. We'd like to give some shout-outs to some folks. First off, a shout-out to Eliza Big Pharma Caton. She was recently telling me about how well they took care of their employees at her work placement, before telling me sort of sheepishly that she was also working unpaid overtime.
Ooh, that's theft.
Yeah.
You know what? I think wage theft is bigger than any other kind of theft in terms of money value.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know the exact context of the situation, but I just thought that was funny.
Oh,
funny
that
bad.
Makes me sad. Yeah.
This show was brought to you by the Coalition of Mining Companies. That's right. We're in the pocket of Big Hole.
Big Hole. Is that like where Arrow is like air, but it's just covered in chocolate? Like they pretend that Arrow bars they're selling you air?
No, that was just Big Hole.
Hole.
I think that was from an
mining.
XKCD comic that we read. Remember that was saying because big blank, all the different ways that you could phrase it.
Yeah.
Where it's big like mining is Big Hole, or like the like poultry whatever. You could say you're in the pocket of Big Egg, and all that stuff. Anyways, we'd also like to give a huge thank you to all the lovely folks who support us on Patreon.
And that would be Victor Gomez, Consul Peasant, and Edwoon at the top tier last word. Sinemac and Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier. Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, and Eddydoo at the credited level. And Chris Wolf, Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 241, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isfar E at the gratitude level.
There you go. Thanks so much for your support, and we'll see you all next time.
Komoda.